So another term for subsoiling is ripping or chisel plowing. And what the chisel plow is, it undoes a plow pan. It's a deep shank that's about just like this. You need 10 horsepower per shank. So if you have a tractor that's 30 horsepower, you can run a 2 to 3 shank chisel plow. And they make them in different sizes. There's 1 shank chisel plows, there's 2, 3, you can get up to, if you have a big tractor with 100 horsepower, you can run a 10 shank. And what that does is it comes under, if this is the plow pan, it rips underneath it. So it's really beneficial for silvopasture systems, hill country, contours, because you're introducing biology to deeper levels of the soil horizon. It's a form of bottom-up soil building. If you have a shallow soil and you're not going to break your implement, if you have a powerful enough tractor, you can actually break up rock. A lot of the material here, saprolite material, is soft. They call it rotten granite. You can just take it when you excavate for a house or something. You can take the stone and you can literally crumble it. It's a metamorphosed sandstone, so it's very, very crumbly. So equipment is very beneficial for bottom-up soil building, especially this chisel plow. Yes?
Kind goes right on the berm itself or below the berm that you just created with the moldboard.
Right on the berm.
Right on top.
Yep. Yep, you just stick the tree in and then whoosh, just like that. You just close it up with your hands. I think we planted 1,200 trees in 5 hours. More of it was the layout, actually. It took more time with the layout and actually just doing math, just measuring each row to see how long it was. Because you see, I went in March and I gave him this design. They had a house, they had a very nice barn, big equipment, and then this big crop field. And actually, Daniel, my friend, grew an awesome, productive garden there. And nobody was growing in Anderson County, Tennessee. He went to Cooperative Extension, and the lady said, "Oh, you're a farmer." She was so excited because there's no farmers in that county. It's just a bedtime community for Knoxville. All the what do you call them, university professors live in Andersonville. But they have great farmland. It's the most ironic thing. And she was ready to give them a greenhouse. She said, "Oh, we award 2 farmers a greenhouse every year, a big hoop house. Would you like it?" And for some reason they didn't get one because I think they'd already bought. And that nobody had walked in to get it that year. I mean, there's just no farmers there. So he walked in, he raised a good garden. So look, you can see, my point here is there's 11 rows. I had measured the field, and I had thought that we were going to be able to fit, 9 rows there. But in actuality, it became only 5. This is that part of that field. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I think over there's 5. So for measuring the field, trying to figure out your between row spacings, and actually then doing the layout with the flags and the paint and then mowing, it's totally different. It turned out really different, which was okay because we got 1,200 trees. And it was just better to lay out fewer than more. Let's talk about species for a little bit. Chestnuts, very interesting crop. Historically important for Native Americans. What I'm promoting is only Chinese chestnut and maybe a little bit of Korean and Japanese. I have a little nursery now. It's all straight Chinese. I just get seed from Greg Miller Nurseries. It's Route 8 Cooperative in Ohio, Michigan. It's a select type of seed, so they take the seed from their best specimens. It's $78 for 10 pounds, which is 300 seeds. I raise them I have a picture at the very end of the presentation. I raise them in a metal bin. This is just what Grant Schultz at Versaland is doing, just buying select seed or taking, actually, if you know a Chinese chestnut tree, or even an American or a hybrid tree that you like, you plant it out. So for your silvopasture or your agroforestry farm, you want to think about height. There's so many elements to think about. I like the Chinese chestnut because I think it's beautiful, and it's a short tree. I don't want a tree that's going to be 100 feet high. I want a tree that's going to be about 30 feet high, and that's the Chinese chestnut. They're big. They're bigger than any type of American hybrids that are coming out of the nurseries. And there's so many types of chestnuts. If you go to Burnt Ridge Nursery, maybe you've been to their webpage, every single year they have a new type of chestnut that's a hybrid of it's Granada or a Dentale. It's all American, Japanese, Korean, and Chinese. There's plenty, and then there's European. There's plenty of new plant breeding going on, and they're becoming more available. So the chestnut represents, in the human diet or for your animals, a good carbohydrate source. It's not just like fruit. It's not simple carbohydrates. It's a complex carbohydrate similar to rice nutritionally. It has about 4 grams protein. It's not hugely high protein. It has no oil to speak of. So it's a perishable crop. It comes off the tree like an acorn. It's wet. So you need to store it. Does that make sense? Hazelnuts are the oil and the protein. It's a proper nut. And what that means is it dries down naturally on the tree. You can pick it and it's relatively stable. It's like a walnut, like an almond. The industrial uses in the hulls. Apparently nothing burns from any biological source. Obviously coal, coke burns extremely hot, but hazelnut hulls burn hot enough to be used in industrial processes. Why are we raising soybeans in the Midwest for animal feed when we could make perfectly good oil from hazelnuts? Why are we raising soybeans when we could be using hazelnuts as a source of oil? It's better than soybean oil or corn oil. It can be mechanically harvested. You don't have to plow the soil. Here's 2 nurseries. Forest Ag, that's Mark Shepard's nursery. It's actually called New. Well, go to forestag.com. It's a type of, there's another outfit that's his nursery. But that's what I recommend because Forest Ag, okay, Badger Set, a little bit about Badger Set. That's a good nursery in Minnesota. Philip Rudder, who figured out the breeding method for the American Chestnut Foundation. Are you familiar with the American Chestnut Foundation? It's a very big and old nonprofit. Jimmy Carter is on their board. It's been around since 1983. They're actually headquartered in Nashville now. Philip Rudder spearheaded this really incredible genetic, what to say, it's a breeding methodology, which they're using exclusively in the American Chestnut Foundation. And they are totally confident that they can make the American chestnut a certain percentage American with the characteristics of the American through this breeding methodology. So Philip Rudder went away from president of American Chestnut Foundation, founded Badger Set, which has the goal of replacing soybeans in the Midwest with hazelnuts. Excuse me if that's off base, but that's how I take it. They're very hard to order from. They'll even tell you themselves. I have an order pending from 2 years ago that I have not received yet this year. So they're very difficult to order from. So if you can get their hazelnuts, do it, but they're only this big, so you have to raise them out for a year. Otherwise, just get from Forest Ag. They're the same price, $7 per piece, and they're this big, ready to set out and compete with grass. Yes?
You had a question slide up.
Yes.
Those sleeves,
Yes.
how old are the trees when they're first planted and surrounded by that sleeve, and how tall are they generally?
Oh, they make them in different sizes. This is the second big size. This is 36 inches, I think, or 24.
The entire tree, though, is encased in that sleeve there?
The issue is with hazelnut, something that shoots, that has adventitious sprouts from the bottom. You just take it off in the second year.
Okay.
Yeah. This has a number of really good benefits that I didn't cover. Apparently it can catch dew. Okay. It creates a richer carbon environment. So what you do, you're supposed to bury it 1 or 2 inches in the soil. Or if you don't have soil to work with, if it's already grown up a little bit, you can just mulch. If you're going to do mulching, you stick the mulch right up against the sleeve. So that way you get a richer carbon dioxide environment. It's doing more photosynthesis. It protects from animals. It protects from herbivory by deer until it's out of the sleeve, obviously. Second year, you can remove it unless there hasn't been much growth. Yeah, they're good. I recommend them. But like I said, primarily if you're on a small acreage, it's protection from human with weed whacker. Any questions about hazelnuts? Black locust is really good. It's probably one of the best forageable crops. Animals don't necessarily love to eat it. But that said, I went out this morning and for the first time this year, it was early, so I was carrying I always pick up my girl in the morning so Mrs. can sleep a little more. And she points to the door, so we go out for a walk, go visit the cows. And I look over and Susan, the cow, is chomping on one of the locust trees. Oh, great, that's great. I wish I had this on video for the slide. But they will chew them. But that said, the black locust has 2 thorns. And between those thorns comes the, I'm not a plant physiologist, but there's a word for the stem of compound leaves, right, Patrick?
That's like physiologist.
Okay, great. It's the compound leaf. Hickories, walnuts, ash, locust. They all have a big twig, and then they have alternating leaves all along it. And then they lose that entire apparatus as soon as November comes, October, November. So it leaves those two thorns. So cows will avoid it because of those thorns, but otherwise it is very grazable. And I recommend also at the end you watch Coppice Agroforestry by Dave Jackie on YouTube. It's at the end. You can write it down then. It's an hour and 19 minutes long. Very good YouTube. That fellow and another fellow are writing a book that's going to provide some of the first recommendations for temperate region, like plant cutting. I don't know what's going to be in it, but say like this kind of stuff, but with very practical recommendations on hopefully plant spacing, obviously the physiology and the science behind it, but also on cycles of when to cut and how to convert these kind of tree matter into dollars and cents for your farm. Nutrition for your animals. Does that make sense?
How long does it take for the locust to mature?
Oh gosh, they're fast. You set them out, they're this big, and then they'll be this big by the end of the year. And I'm cutting them all to about this height, and then I put a chestnut or persimmon right next to it. There was one picture where there's a locust and then there's a persimmon just this close. So eventually it will tear the locust out just by repeated cutting. So it'll shoot, then the cows can graze it. Especially eventually what will happen, it'll be like this. There's enough space here. Here's a black locust. There's a little bit. This is, let's say, as a global audience, let's use meters, okay? We're Americans, we can learn meters. This is going to be 3 meters high, right? It's 15 feet. Here's a little tree, a little persimmon, which is going to be the overstory, the eventual. Persimmon is a rugged tree. I think we're going to highlight it in the next slide. These are very close. This is just 1 meter apart. This is year 1. You set out the persimmon, it's half a meter high, very small. The locust, you're cutting the branches, and you're either feeding it to your animals or you're feeding the soil. By cutting it, you're feeding it subterraneally by the action of sloughing off roots. And you are feeding it with the leaves and shoots, your persimmon tree, right? And it's also benefiting from shade. Year 2, your locust is still high, and then maybe at the end of the season, this is where I don't know anything about plant cutting cycles yet. We're just doing this by the seat of our pants. Maybe you cut the whole thing down in year 2 or 3, and your persimmon's a little taller now. Now it's 1.5 meters high. They're a slow-growing tree. Then you cut it down, right? And then what happens in that year? This shoots out a bunch of stems, maybe as many as 20. And they might grow, this locust might grow this much in a single year when you cut it to the ground. Okay, then you feed it again. 3rd year, your persimmon is above the browse line. What's the browse line with cows? 3.5 feet, okay? 3.5 or 4 feet. What happens then? You've cut it again. But now you can let your animals, you can remove the electric fence that is protecting those strips of trees, and you can just let them graze right up against your trees. It's very good. The persimmon by then is well rooted enough, and actually some research I hit on says persimmons seem to like getting beat up by cows at the root zone. Beat up means like the cow hooves, the sheep or whatnot, they're hitting the roots. You can leave cows underneath a persimmon tree all winter, and they're fine. It's an ebony. It's the only temperate species ebony. They're a rugged tree. Ice, wind, whatnot. They resist it. You might have to be more delicate. If the stem of your other trees is maybe getting like this big, then you can let the animals, like a large ruminant like cow, up against, because they'll scratch on it, whatnot. The idea is you have more trees, they're going to be less hard on all of them. Does that make sense? Some people call silvopasture, oh, I got a tree in my pasture. Well, one tree doesn't cut it. You need to have a lot of trees. We're going to go over silvopasture science in just a little bit, and I have another YouTube video for you. So third, does that make sense? So 3rd year, you let the cows graze the locust, but the persimmon is higher than it. So that's the way you run it out of the system. Meanwhile, it's producing tons of subterranean nitrogen for your guy. Incidentally, Elaeagnus, autumn olive, produces 160 pounds of nitrogen per acre. That's like alfalfa. That's incredible. I took this picture. I took a land management job in New York for 8 months. Never thought I'd leave North Carolina, but I did. Persimmon. Here's our persimmon. It's 15 inches at breast height, and it's 65, 70 feet high. Every year it makes a big crop of persimmons. Delicious. You can't beat it. It's the perfect pasture tree. And if you are an observer of nature, you'll notice that it rarely grows in the forest. It's almost always growing in pasture. So this is a grassland tree. Some people consider it a weed, but in the J. Russell Smith's book, written in 1929, Tree Crops, he had a whole section, a whole chapter devoted to, I think it was the governor of Georgia, back, that was almost 100 years ago, who had farms, he had cattle farms, and he would also was expanding them, and he would always leave the persimmon and the mulberry trees because it's September to December bearing of heavy carbohydrate crop. Cows love it. They'll eat all of them. Actually, when we walk up to that tree around that time of year, the cows don't like to chew as much. They'll run up to us because they'll expect that we're going to pick them for them and just feed them with our hands. I say, pick them yourself, but it's perfect. Very rich food. They'll make a lot of weight gain, milk, meat, and eggs on that. Chickens eat them too. Sometimes they hang on till December, no joke. Persimmons will hang on. If it's not really, really windy, persimmons will hang on the tree. They're only about this big and they're really seedy, but I like the seedy ones. The reason is they fall, they're still intact. So just something to think about if you're going to do improving through grafting. You might not, if the tree, you've let the tree grow too high and they fall, you can't pick them on a ladder or something. They will kersplat and be nothing. Your question?
Yeah, male, female bearing. Both of them are dropping fruit.
Okay, so this means male, female bearing is called dioecious. That means you have separate parts. It means you have male parts on one specimen and female parts in one specimen. It's not like a, yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mulberry is the same, but it seems like most of them end up as females. With mulberries, it's probably something like 80 or 90% of the wild trees you discover, or if you're going to purchase from a nursery, most of them are going to be female. Mulberries, you'll know within 3 to 4 years. They fruit very quickly, flower and fruit. Persimmons will be extremely slow.
Like how many years till?
Oh, 15 maybe, yeah. And then there's also a very strange phenomena with persimmons. I think it's called floricopia, in which a male will set fruit without a flower. It happens sometimes that an older specimen will just suddenly bear fruit and seed with actually being a male. Yes?
But you can always put a female on a male, or even if you don't know the species, and it becomes, of course, bearing.
That's why we
switch
switch
over.
Apples, pears, they are monoecious. They have female and male parts on the same specimen, on the same tree. Pines are male at the top of the tree, female on the bottom. Squash is you have male flowers and female flowers. Okra, you have a perfect flower. So inside that flower, a bee just goes, and it's just male and female parts all contained right there. So yeah, dioecious is more like trees are typically more dioecious, means Latin means double housed. You have two houses. Mulberry, very good. I say it's early succession because foresters consider it a junk tree. It grows really fast. If you get any ice storms or heavy snow, it tends to collapse. It's a light wood, but I found it burns very nicely. It has a beautiful yellow grain. Only spoons I ever made are from mulberry, and it was nice, beautiful wood. If you cut it, if you coppice it, it will survive significantly longer than if you just let it go. A mulberry will grow very, very, very fast, and then around this time it'll just start, the branches will start breaking off of it, and it will eventually die. You see a lot of mulberry, as soon as it gets shade on it in the forest, it's out of the system. It just falls out. And it's significantly rot resistant, so you can find it as a firewood log. I'd love to see somebody make little boxes or something out of mulberry wood. The leaf is extremely nutritious. Some of this is going to be covered in Dave Jackie's book, Coppice Agroforestry, on the nutrition levels of these things, because it's like this. The nutrition in grass, this is the basis of silvopasture right here. Summer slump. This is midsummer here, say, okay? Here's December. Grass production slumps. Trees come on later, but they maintain their protein and carbohydrate levels longer, and then they have this curve. Really, actually, the basis of forage production in silvopasture systems is giving your understory partial shade. Does that make sense? I didn't intend to go into this now, so we'll go into it in more detail in a little bit. Siberian pea shrub, I don't want to say much about it. I haven't had much luck with it out in the full sun because, again, it's from Siberia. It's very nutritious, and it's a thornless legume, which is very nice. This is a young May eating the whole stem. The stem is also very pliable, and it's green, and she ate the whole stem, and you can hear the crunch. It's a beautiful shrub, but I've only had luck growing it in the shade of other trees. Benefits of diversity: improved water retention via shade. Now we're getting into the silvopasture science of it. Disease resistance for the trees. Apples, let's take the example of apples. Terrible amount of diseases. I don't recommend you grow apples to make $1 million, unless you started with 2. This is the old joke about being a bee farmer, right? You start with 2. If you want to make $1 million in bee farming, you start with 2. Right, Wade? Same thing if you're going to be an apple grower. Henderson County apple growers is always in the Citizen Times. Oh, the apple farmers are going to have a bad year or a good year. Headline number 1. At any rate, those trees don't have the benefit of animals eating all the grass, pooping. If you have birds in the system, they're going to eat larvae of insects that can sprout from the ground. The fissured bark on an apple tree is also a vector for disease, but if you have a cow going over there and rubbing it, you see like an old fence post in a cow pasture, what happens? It becomes smooth. It's good for apple trees to have a smooth bark, less a vector. They chew all the apples are shade tolerant, so they'll do this. They spread, they tend to weep. The cows will eat them to there, or the sheep, which is good because what do the insects do? They crawl up the grass stems and invade the apples that way. So apples in a silvopasture, they're better. Actually, they're just much. Mark Shepard has some anecdotes about it from his farm. He has very little, of course it's in Wisconsin, better climate for growing apples. North Carolina, not such a good place to grow apples. Or plums. Peaches, maybe. A lot of benefits from trees in a pasture. Reduction of erosion by wind and water. Does that make sense? Self-manuring, self-maintenance, auto-harvesting. What does that mean, auto-harvesting? That means the animals are harvesting the apples themselves. That's where actually diseases get cracked. An apple drop, because there's normally a mid-season fruit drop, right? Of apples that have been, or pears, or any fruit, they'll drop. I see persimmons dropping right now in our pasture, and those are ones that are probably infested with some type of disease. They drop, and the animals will clean them up. If you have pigs, pigs will clean up everything. And then if you have chickens to follow them, you reduce vectors for disease in your large ruminants. By the way, hazelnuts, this is our persimmon in fall. Check that out. We have a lot of persimmons in the pasture, but this is the big one. See that green swath? It's always like that. This is March. See the leaves on the ridgeline have not leafed out. The pasture here is just bone dry. It's really low, but here, even though the cows beat it up, it's always green. And guess what? There's no cocklebur there. But as soon as you walk out of the shade of the tree, there's cocklebur, there's wingstem, there's all manner of broadleafy weeds. Broadleafy weeds need what to sprout? They need sunlight, most of them. A lot of the asters are germinating by sunlight, not by water and soil contact. So you don't have these broadleafy weeds under a beautiful big majesty tree like persimmon. And when does it leaf out? It leaves out around here it leaves out in late May, middle to late May. And it's just a long leaf out period into June. And then it loses them relatively early.
Notice any effect on multiflora?
Oh yeah, there's multiflora, but not underneath trees. They will grow. They're relatively shade tolerant. A lot of the invasives are. Cool season grasses. Do you know your grasses, anyone? Almost all of these grasses that are most nutritious are cool season. They grow on the shoulders of the summer. Orchard grass, fescue, timothy. All of these are more nutritious for animals. Bermuda grass is a summer grass. Is it nutritious? Not so much. Right? So you want to encourage cool season grass production. That's what a silvopasture does. Let's watch a little video.
I asked the question, what is silvopasture? I present this picture. It's taken from Missouri. There's a thinning and sort of a post oak stand for this part of the world. So we do have hardwood stands, and perhaps we can get to something like this. This picture may be something that's more relevant for the Southside Virginia. This picture probably comes out of Florida, I think is where I got this one. And you can see I've got, I don't know if it was slash or loblolly longleaf, some sort of pine here with warm season grasses and the livestock underneath it. So I asked the question, what is silvopasture? And before I do that further, I'd like to just kind of put it in context. We're thinking about integrating trees into production systems, and silvopasture is, from one way to define it, it's one of 5 classic agroforestry practices, and those would include riparian buffer strips, which many of you are probably familiar with in terms of trying to implement some sort of erosion and protection plan with a riparian buffer strip. There are other agroforestry practices, including forest farming, where I've thinned and managed that tree in a sort of that stand in a semi-wild way, but I'm getting crops like ginseng or mushrooms or golden seal, some high-value crop typically that's a shade-loving crop. Windbreaks, we used to see those. We don't see as many of those anymore since corn has gone way up and people have taken their windbreaks out. But quite frankly, there's quite a bit of data out there that shows that yields are actually better with windbreaks in the system. And alley cropping is probably the thing that we see the least of in this country. This picture is actually taken in France. They're harvesting wheat under poplar trees. These systems are also used in China. We could use them here, but I think that's probably, while some consider it low-hanging fruit relative to environmental conservation, from a cultural change, this would really probably be one of the hardest. And one of the easiest, I think, though, will be silvopastures, because I think there's some issues that we confront from a forage livestock production standpoint where trees can actually be used to our benefit. So, I want to define something. Oftentimes, I can define something better by saying what it's not, right? You say, well, what is that? Well, it's not X, Y, or Z. It's, okay, so silvopasture is not new. And I think many of you probably have seen some form of silvopasture in your life. You may not have recognized it as that. It may not have really truly fit the definition in that the trees were not particularly well managed, but these systems are not new. They're still commonly used in parts of the developing world, and this picture is not a developing world shot. This was taken in Blacksburg just a couple years ago. What you've got is essentially a tall fescue, bluegrass, white clover forage base under black locust trees. And I'd say probably 3-4 generations ago, this would have been common in Appalachia. You would have grown these locust trees. They're putting nitrogen back into the system. Their young sprouts are a form of browse. The trees become timbers for utility buildings. They become firewood. They become fence posts. Very common from that perspective. Silvopasture also is not turning cows loose in the forest. And I think if there's any sort of image that foresters have and conservationists have about this idea or a misconception about silvopasture, this is probably one of the biggest ones for the conservation community. I don't want those cows in that tree, in that woods. That's going to tear that stuff up. Well, do you see any sort of management here? There's no management in this picture. We've just turned them loose in the back 40. And there's too much of that goes on. In the same way, I think agriculturalists have real headaches or hang-ups with silvopasture because they say, I don't want trees in my system. But a silvopasture is not a single tree standing guard over the pasture, over a quagmire that's just a vector for parasites and E. coli and other disease organisms. And I think it's this kind of image, or perhaps these kind of images, where I've got not only autumn olive and multiflora rose and other kinds of stuff that's coming up here, or I've got cedars that are taken over here. I think it's these kind of images that convey the negative message to the agricultural community. That's what their vision of silvopasture is. And this, neither of these would be accurately described as silvopasture. So, how do we define it? Couple of big names in the silvopasture community, Terry Clausen and Stephen Sharrow, they defined silvopasture as a land management practice that intensively integrates or integrates intensive animal production, silviculture, management of the trees, and forage management, all together on the same land base. And functionally, what's happening is we're working to have a system that gives us both short and long-term returns. So, sustainable practice, intensive integrated management with trees, forages, and livestock. So I've got to be managing all these components, not just one or two. And again, two different economic scales or time frames. And I have laid this as silvopasture represents an opportunity. And I wanted to describe some of those opportunities and explore how this works in some of the next few slides. There is quite a bit of evidence. There's quite a bit of evidence in the literature about why we might want to do silvopasture in terms of increased forage production, improved forage nutritive value, greater animal performance. What else we got here? Production of additional products, added biodiversity, soil fertility, and increases and reduced erosion, and improved stream quality. Now, you may not get all of these production functions with the silvopasture, and we'll talk about that. But there are, again, these added conservation benefits, and so I wanted to try to describe some of these things. And one of the first questions I would say was, or you might be having, is, okay, this will cure everything except ingrown toenails. Fantastic. How do you make this work? Well, what we need to think about is what are the resources in the system, and what are the tree-forage interactions in these systems? Because typically we often think of trees and forages as being competitive, and they may well be, but can we manage those relationships so that the whole perhaps is greater than the sum of its parts? And when we look at resources in the system, the first one, we've got light, there's soil nutrients, moisture, the nutrient returns from the trees and the forages and the livestock. How do we manage each of those components so that this thing will work? Looking first at light, the energy coming into the system to drive the whole system, I want to make sort of essentially 4 points on this slide. First, if you remember your biology class, you learned the C3 photosynthetic pathway, just that 3 carbon compounds that are being made when carbon dioxide is converted into plant tissue. Those C3 plants are light saturated at about 50% full sun. Now, what does that mean?
It means all they need is 50% to maintain all the production.
Well, that means that exactly. They're not going to do anything more if they get more sunlight, right? So above 50%, that's a loss. Now, I will say in a dense stand, you probably need more than 50% sunlight because the individual leaf is light saturated at 50%, but you've got to have a little more light to get down into the canopy. So oftentimes when we talk about silvopastures, you hear people say, well, kind of about 50% shade, probably a little bit less than that. But those are some of the questions we're working on. Still, at the end of the day, the point for bullet 1 is that these leaves are light saturated, so that represents an opportunity to capture more of that sunlight resource in other products if we can manage it appropriately. Another thing that happens when plants are shaded, C3 plants, when they're shaded, especially, well, not especially, but all plants will have greater leaf growth at the expense of roots. So sometimes what happens is that plant, when it's shaded, it partitions more to above ground growth, and we actually can see increases in productivity.
That's called etiolation. So the root to shoot ratio is greater under diffuse light. So do you understand that there's 3 pathways for carbon fixation in plants? C3, C4, and the other one, which is succulents, right? Most plants in the world are C3 plants, 70% of them. 17% of them are C3, and the remaining ones are succulents. And grasses are largely C3, and under diffuse light conditions will produce better forage, more digestible forage. This is a good, I think I recommend this. You watch the whole thing. It's not terribly long. It's from Virginia Tech. It's just called Silvopasture. And there's some other good bits about digestibility of different forages under different light conditions. And I recommend if you can see it, if you want to learn more of the science behind it. It is a developing science. Now, this is something that came from Mark Shepard. For maximum abundant productivity of any crop field that's integrated with animals, it can either be an alley cropping system where you're using trees as a mulch source for your alley, which would be your crops. This is another form of agroforestry, alley cropping. I'm going to do some slides on it because I did an installation in New York that's an alley crop. Tropical regions is going to be 30 to 55% woody cover for maximum productivity of the soil, of food for human beings or animals, right? And depending on your latitude, you should have between 15 to 25% in a temperate region. If you're approaching actually latitude here in south, you can probably up it to 40% tree cover. But how high are those trees? Does that make sense? Hazelnuts are a shorter tree because let's go over this real quick. This is 360 degrees. This is north, east, south, and west. If you have tree, this could be flat or it could be a hill. If you're on a slope, let me go over two things at once. Why we and Marshall have located our apples and pears on the north slope. Frost prevention, right? It's obvious. And the reason is because you don't have, in summer, this is winter sun right here. The angle is like at about 100 degrees, right? If this is south, the sun's rising there and doing this. But if it's in summer, it's rising greater than 180 degrees. It's like this. It swoops and it sets over there. So if I'm south, it's rising there and setting there. So you still get full sun on a north slope, even if your slope is like this. You'll still get largely full sun so long as you don't have trees. Okay, now scratch that, and you have a crop field that's flat or otherwise, and you've oriented your rows north-south, which is very nice. I like to orient rows north-south. Say you are at 32 degrees north latitude, which is the latitude at the installation I did in New York. We're going to have a visual tour of that. It will be interesting to you, I hope. It's a perfectly flat field. The sun rises here and sets here. I mean, it's really diminutive sunlight in the winter. But it's much greater than 270 degrees. You're having 16 to 17 hours of sunlight a day. Your spacing, we spaced them there 40 feet. Depends on what your management goals are. If it's a silvopasture to increase forage, again, the numbers aren't necessarily there. I know there's recommendations for some of the silvopastures, and is this slide? There's one. In Florida, people do have an established silvopasture. They'd use crimson clover in winter and sorghum Sudan grass in summer. It's planted. You can use a seed drill, which is another tractor implement, to install it. And then they do loblolly pine. In Missouri, they're doing black walnut, and actually they have black walnut hulling stations all through Missouri, and people are doing beef cattle in between there. So there are some established silvopastures in the mainstream, no doubt. But the spacing is still getting worked on. And now I know a lot of you guys are interested in tree crops, chestnuts, hazelnuts, those kind of things. So I'm glad you're here. It's a captive audience. Your spacing is also going to depend on tree height. So for this installation in New York, it was a 40-foot spacing, and there was an alleyway going through the middle, which to a forest trail. Did a circle. So north of it was chestnuts, and then fill in the future with fruit trees, apples, pears, and peaches. And then at the end, we put beautiful flowering trees, Juneberries, and peaches. But this was all hazelnut. 40-foot spacings. They're only going to be 12 to 15 feet. You can manage them lower. You can cut them with a reciprocating saw every couple of years at about this high. So you have totally full sun for alley cropping in between. Does that make sense? So let's just go to that slide. So last spring, right after doing the Tennessee installation, I took a bus I took a U-Haul. I moved it and rented my house to Kate and Wade there, and picked up my wife in New York City airport. She emigrated from Sweden. She brought her 4-year-old, and she was pregnant. At any rate, so I became manager of the Sadie Acre property, and we did an installation. It was really fun. It's a 1.3 acre flat field, 42 north latitude, 2 hours north of New York City. We planted 100 hazelnuts, 21 chestnuts, a bunch of Juneberries, apples, plums, peaches, different things. And that schematic I drew on the board was essentially for a forest garden, which is you can call the capstone of permaculture. People talk about food forest. So this section here, north of that trail, which is going right into the forest, was chestnuts. And we did 3 locusts in between each chestnut. And then the south was the alley crop, so 40-foot spacings. Does that make sense? I trained the land manager there. He got a tractor this summer to do alley cropping in between it. He makes this awesome pesto, so he's growing basil, all sort of things. Here's some of the pictures. What we did, I just got a local farmer, Clyde. He had about 3 teeth, salt of the earth, nicest guy in the world. And I could trust that he was going to come. Didn't know when, but I knew he was going to do it. He brought the equipment, he plowed it, he disked it, and then he augered. And we installed the trees. They grew very nicely. I used just a Cub Cadet to fertilize the trees. We put rock dust, different things. And then we fenced it, all with volunteers. It had 1 gate for access and then 4 human gates for ease of walking from the garden. There's a very nice 1-acre garden over there. So this was kind of the orchard plus the alley crop. Every project needs a good foreman. And then there's some wind guards. This is something you can do for more of the tender trees. Some of the apple rootstocks, one more modern one that's really popular, I think it's Geneva 935 is popular. You have to stake it. It doesn't do much unless you stake it for the first 2 years. I always use M111, which is just an older rootstock, and it's well anchored. You just set it out, and you don't have to do this. But this is basically, you have 3 lengths of hoses, just an old hose. You just cut it about like that. And then you put a wire and then 3 points of contact so wind doesn't push around the tree. We decided to plant pumpkins. So this is part of the hazelnuts. Those are the leaves of hazelnut. They look a little bit like witch hazel, but more serrate. And then this is just the forest trail. We built some bridges in there because there's a lot of wetlands. For a farm focused on annual production, and this is what Mark Shepard did in Wisconsin. Before the trees were establishing, he was doing, and still is doing, cropping for a wholesale market through the Organic Valley Cooperative that you might have seen. They produce milk, dairy, eggs, butter. He was raising acorn squashes, peppers, asparagus, which is a perennial. You can do anything. The sky's the limit. If you put your trees on a larger spacing, or if you put them on a small spacing, say you want eventually your trees from 2 rows, these are 2 rows, to crown out at the top. Until that time, if you have the equipment and interest and you have a good market and you know that you can make some money, you can do some cropping. On a smaller scale, you can do this for your home. You can raise plenty of food in between rows of trees. We can't do it in Marshall. It's way too steep. It's unfortunate. That's why I've gotten out and done some other installations on fun projects. So the benefits to your crops are immense. You have a windbreak, the activity of a microclimate. You can incorporate perennial nitrogen-fixing shrubs that you cut and then you feed your plant. If you have a mulcher, you can take Eleagnus, you can take Siberian Pea shrub, black locust, and you can chip shred them and feed your beds, your garden beds in between these crops. Does that make sense? This is a slide dedicated just to the traditional methods of cropping. Moldboard plow, disc harrow. It's a good way to do things. But I know some of you are operating on maybe a smaller scale. Lasagna gardening, biointensive methods of double digging. These are all very good. You can also incorporate these into an alley crop system. The benefits and drawbacks, there's always benefits and drawbacks to different cropping methods. Lasagna gardening can be very good, but your soil's not going to warm up in the spring as quickly as if you do this traditional method, which is to plow it. Traditional plowing has drawbacks. You destroy the earthworms, plow pan, destruction of soil microorganisms, established soil food web, loss of soil organic matter. So no-till, depending on whatever you do, I'm just saying that this type of traditional cropping, or maybe fringe cropping, or you can say more holistic methods like lasagna gardening, can be incorporated into alley cropping. So here are some established examples. Christmas trees and sheep people are doing. The Florida sorghum Sudan in summer and crimson clover in winter with pine, loblolly or slash pine. Missouri black walnut and black Angus beef cattle. God bless America. That's also there. Silvopasture is not just grazing animals in the forest, however. This is Cronin, 1984. That's a book called, what's it called? It was a good book about what the New World was like when the colonists arrived.
1490.
No, I'll try to remember it. He made an observation about the species that were coming over from Europe because they had cows. They brought cows in the Mayflower. So cows were immediately established in these parts, but they had nothing to eat here because they didn't have the types of, gosh, what is it? There's a lot of these species like plantain. They're susceptible to heavy browsing because they keep their roots tight over the central crown. And there's actually a physiology term for those types of tree species. So as soon as those got established, so there was a time when they were cutting the trees and just putting the animals into the forest. And the animals really suffered because they had almost nothing to eat in the understory of the forest. So they could only feed them pasture. But at this point, so many of almost all of the forages that people are using nowadays that have established themselves in a wild pasture like over there on that hillside, they're all European origin. Almost all the grasses. There's very few native grasses that are important for beef, cattle, sheep, dairy cattle, or anything. And they're all these ones that are they're just genetically disposed to handle heavy browse because whether they're broadleafy, they keep their shoots, all their shoots over a heavy, like a stem, a taproot. Think wild carrot.
Bunch grass?
Yeah, and clumping grasses, all those ones, yep. And the grasses as well. So start with the pasture if you can, and then lead the renovation of your land with the trees, with the working trees. That's an agroforester's term. You want your trees to work for you. You want them to benefit you. And you want to set out a lot of them, not just one in a single pasture. Plenty of ecosystem services. We've gone over this, plenty of things. All sort of enterprises can lead away from a silvopasture agroforestry system. You can do a farm-scale nursery, mushroom logs, education, obviously, firewood. Firewood's pretty profitable. I sold firewood in the Asheville area just while I was watching my grandparents for a few years because their neighbor had a woodlot. And they said, oh yeah, cut whatever you want out of there. Just cut dead wood. There was so much dead wood in this 18 acres of trees, and they had trail network. So I would just go like with a little garden cart like this, and just in my spare time, I probably made $5,000 or $6,000 a year, and it was just fun. I'd sell to this, then you go to Asheville, and you could put your prices up too. Pizza joint, okay, I'm going to cut it really small for you, because they need really small sprigs for all of these wood-fired pizza joints. You can make good money on firewood. The micronutrition from small trees, if you have a system that's not going to incorporate cows so much, underneath you can grow high-value currants, gooseberries, aronia, and there's actually medicinal uses for a lot of these. Improving by infield seasonal grafting, yes, obviously. Frost seeding, you can improve your stand by doing frost seeding. Any questions on that? It's a pretty simple thing to do. You just want to watch the weather, throw some seed. Fall is better to plant than spring, much better actually, because mostly the grasses and clovers, these forages, will suffer more in a summer drought than they will by a freeze. They'll just grow. You can actually plant them in November. Around this area, you can plant things fine in November, clover, these things. They'll just put a tiny little root down, and they'll survive all winter. But they will, if you plant them in spring with that small root, they'll be susceptible to drought. So all of your cooperative extension agents actually, they suggest planting in fall, frost seeding. Any questions? Yes?
When you plant under the black locust, are you planting typically on the north or the south of the black locust?
Okay, so if it's in a row, it just depends on the contour. In New York, we were just doing straight rows. There's a flat field, so we set out chestnut right here, and then another chestnut 14 feet away, and then 3 black locusts in between. In Tennessee, it was a flat, then rolling to an east, and then a south facing field, so it was depending on the contour. So we're only planting in row. My comment about the sea berry and planting the currants to the northeast was just in more of like a food forest style, where everything is just kind of together. Because at my site in Marshall, I actually own 1 acre, but I'm helping to manage 19 plus 33. It's not all open. It's about 10 plus 19 with this type of cropping system. And there it's just rows. So depending the orientation or the aspect of the tree, north, south, east, west, just depends on where the row is going. Because it's just much easier to manage rows.
Okay, so you're not literally trying to shade the persimmon.
Yeah, actually in the row, yes, we are. But the aspect just depends on where the tree is. Yes?
Have you had any experience trying to get rid of blackberry, dewberry infestation without dumping a lot of chemicals? Your pastures are pretty, mine looks all just...
Yeah, mowing it. We use a...
You just keep mowing it, and it'll eventually kill it out?
Yeah, blackberries are hard. Blackberries are very hard. Was it pasture before?
It was pasture before. It was just left to go.
Hit if you can. And you have cows?
No.
You don't have anything?
I have no animals. I just have equipment, and I try not to dump a bunch of chemicals on it.
Mow it a lot and then seed it, because I've noticed under blackberries that get established. In our pasture we have blackberry stems, but they creep along the ground. And their leaves are very small and red because they're squelched out by fescue. Fescue's dominant, and the cows are grazing. And every 2 years we mow it. But the blackberries are there. But a blackberry thicket doesn't form, like the 10 and 12 foot high canes, until they're the only thing there. You know what I mean? And that's because it's been ungrazed for so long, or unmowed. So yeah, you have to mow it a whole bunch, unless you don't want to use chemicals. And then seed it. Seed it to fescue, seed it to orchard grass, clover if you can establish it.
But those grasses and clovers, wow.
They will eventually outcompete blackberry, yes.
How about multiflora rows?
Haha, it's relatively easy to cut out at least. Goats will graze it. Okay, we do need to go back to a slide called Goats Not Impossible. I don't know if we need to go to the slide, but I know some of you do have goats. A lot of people don't like goats because they eat your trees. But there's a slide here, there's 7 points on how to keep goats. Keep them fed, minimum of 5 forages, rotate them as much as you can. So there's 3, right? And this is the one people don't like to hear because goats become pets. The escape artist goat, the one that gets out, you have to get rid of it as soon as you can. Because it's going to train the rest of them. Goats are extremely social. You just have to get rid of it. I know it's not nice. Put it in you build a 10,000 volt nuclear powered fence and a goat's still going to get out eventually. So these are just guidelines on how to keep your goats away from your trees. Okay, so here's coming in the other method, protect your trees. You can wrap your trees in burlap up to here because the goats will climb. You can wrap them in burlap and the tree will eventually grow, but apples, pears, peaches, plums, if you're setting out any of these, some of the more tender ones, they'll strip the bark. They won't only just eat all the stems and not eat all the fruits and the flowers, but they will strip the stems, because especially apples and pears, they're delectable. So that's where wrapping in burlap is very helpful. If you did all of these things, you might still have 50% of your trees in your orchard eaten, right? But at least you still have 50%. But you're keeping goats, so if you keep goats, expect some loss from your trees. If you have problems with blackberries or multifloral rows, you can put goats out. But then if you want to do silvopasture or some of these tree crops, you might have problems. You could do it humbly. If you have just 1 row of trees and you get the woven wire fence up to here that's electrified, hopefully that'll keep them off it. You can still wrap each tree. You can get these tree shelters that are this high, and you can prune all of the lower branches so that you train the tree to go up as high as possible. because there's so much photosynthetic potential each year. If you have any type of tree and you trim its lower branches, it's going to put more energy into the top. So you let it go high, train it high. That's what I suggest for cows too. That's what we're doing. Even the chestnuts, at the end of the season, I cut all of the lower branches to try to get it up above browse line so we can remove that fence and increase the forage for the animals. Because right now they're losing, we have, I don't know, 12 rows at the dairy farm, and they're losing about 3 to 5 feet times however many rows we have, multiplied by the length of each row. They're losing that much forage. It might be equal to an acre at this point. And I want to get the animals in there as soon as possible for the ecosystems to function. Another thing I do is I grab the manure. I go out there with with a shovel and I just manure the trees. I collect the cow pats and just put it right on there. Wade is going to go over, he has a very interesting segment. We're going to take a nice long break, have some coffee or tea on the methodologies for soil food web biology, compost tea sprays, how to establish your trees. And it'll be specific for alley cropping, this agroforestry and silvopasture techniques. If you have any other questions, of course, we're going to have an informal session too. Mr. Battle?
Yeah, we bought 100 honey locusts and I thought we were going to put them on our berms. But then as we reflected on it, we decided we'd rather go with alders and mulberries and fruit trees on the berms. And so we're thinking we're just going to plant them out on the pastures. Do you have any ideas on that?
The honey locusts, yeah, you set them out, but if you have animals, protect them because they will get eaten.
Once they have some size on them, they won't, though, will they?
No, once they get above about this. Also, if you set out enough, maybe they'll avoid them because I've set out honey locusts twice. The first time they were all eaten, but it was a very dry year. And then somebody gave me 4 2 years ago, and they've survived. And the cows haven't touched them once, but we've had good years since then. There's been more available forage. They're also on the sprouted barley nowadays, the fodder system. So you never really know what they're going to eat because you can read in the literature, cows and deer do not eat persimmons. It's not true. They will devour them. They'll eat them. But then some years they might just leave them. They're really unpredictable. This is a slide, recommendations for nurseries. You're welcome to write these down. Lawyer Nursery in Montana deals in wholesale, bare root stock, a lot of unusual stuff. If you need alders, you can get them from here. One drawback is they're a little bit pricey on shipping. And they require a $250 minimum. They're northern, so they can ship as late as, now it's July. I got an order from Lawyer's Nursery only because some of the agroforestry geeks in Asheville said, oh, they're having 50% off. I said, okay, I'll get a little something. Cornelian cherry dogwood and Nanking bush cherry. I don't know where to get those at wholesale prices. They're this big and they're 50% off, so of course, let's get those. It's a good outfit, but they're a little bit pricey on shipping and $250 minimum. Forest Ag in Wisconsin, that's Mark Shepard's nursery. It's all subcontracted. The hazelnuts are raised by Nelson Agri Center. Last year, I had them shipped to me, to Tennessee, and to this New York installation. But in New York, they shipped them with no padding around the roots. There was no protective gel that held the water in. So I emailed them. I said, oh, I hope they're going to be okay. They're really dry at the roots. Maybe you can tell your farmer, your producer to pack them a little better, to use some of this. And I think they're going to do that. Badger Set in Minnesota, we already talked about them. Burnt Ridge in Washington, good prices. Also, shipping can be a little bit high. Some of these are free shipping, by the way. The state nurseries are great. Missouri is my favorite. Tennessee, second best. West Virginia, nice. I got locusts from them. Very nice locusts. North Carolina, it's our home state, right? But it's pricier. It's 50 cents a piece. Tennessee and Missouri is approaching 10 to 25 cents a piece. You can get 100 trees from Missouri for $40. Really inexpensive. Pawpaw, elderberry, hazelnut. I don't necessarily recommend those hazelnuts because they're straight American. They're going to be small nutted. That's why I recommend for hazelnuts, go to Forest Ag and Badger Set. So in your notes, write hazels next to those two. For chestnuts, if Versaland is still doing chestnuts, get them there. Otherwise, you can order a lot of different types from Burnt Ridge. They have a lot of interesting different types. Not on here is Oikos Tree Crops, O-I-K-O-S from Michigan. They deal more in like wild genetics of mulberries, persimmons, chestnuts, hazelnuts, plenty of them. I have a little nursery here. I have about 250 chestnuts. Every year I'm going to raise about 300 chestnuts for sale, trade, free. If you're a homesteader, I'm going to give you 1 or 2 if you come to me. So you're welcome to do them. This girl is my 4-year-old. She'll help dig them up for you. Yes?
How do you raise them?
Okay, so I've learned the hard way. This is interesting. The first year of the dairy, we delivered our milk in these. They're coffin coolers. I got them for free behind a going out of business, funeral home. And they're actually shipping containers for dead bodies. So say you die in Maryland, but your family lives in North Dakota, they will ship your body on dry ice. And that's what these 2 things were. They're 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, and we delivered milk in them. We would just fill it with ice first year. I cut the bottom out this year and put hardware cloth. You want to get 1/4 inch hardware cloth. Sorry for our international folks. 1/4 inch is about 1 inch equals 2.54 centimeters, just so you know. So 1/4 inch is about like yay, about like that much. You want to get that, it's called hardware cloth. It's a type of fencing. You want to put that in the bottom. And then on the sides, you can use metal. You can use buckets, a 5-gallon bucket. You just cut out the bottom. Fill it with soil, and then put your chestnuts, and then put this much more soil on top, and then put more of that hardware cloth on top of that, because gophers will eat them from the bottom, and squirrels will dig them from the top. I mean it. I mean, chestnuts are delectable. So if you want to raise your own seedlings, go to Route 8 Cooperative, or Route 9, I can't remember. It's the only commercial Chinese chestnut orchards in the country are in Michigan and Ohio. And they have select seed that you can get. You can get 1 pound, 5 pounds, or 10 pounds. And it's Route 8 Cooperative, I think. A little bit of homework for you. You can contact me anytime, ravenridgefarm@gmail.com. I have business cards here. You can also order seed if you want. This is a really interesting outfit. Since 1926. Seeds for nurserymen and foresters, and nurserywomen, by extension. Very cheap seed. For that one, you have to know Latin. But if you go on their webpage, you can go to common name. But you can order everything. You can order mulberry seed. I don't recommend growing mulberries or persimmons from seed. Just buy them support the state nurseries. I have business cards here. I do installations. I can help you lay out, that kind of thing. I won't gouge you, promise. But a little bit of if you live far away, a little bit of travel time. These 2 are very interesting. Coppice Agroforestry by Dave Jackie, watch that. Syntropy, watch that. I like this book, All Flesh is Grass, by Gene Logston, because it's just a very basic, what is farming book. Grass from corn to barley to also, it's a good book on pasture. He was mainly a writer, but also a homesteader in Ohio. This is the book Restoration Agriculture by Mark Shepard. Highly recommended. And if you have any further questions, I'm sure we'll rendezvous at the breakout time. Thank you so much for coming. See you soon.